One day when Jesus was on earth, he sat himself down on a mountainside. And his boys, the disciples, gathered round him, and he began teaching them, and for hours they sat and they hung on every single word, because at this moment, the King of Heaven was sitting on a mountainside teaching them about the kingdom of heaven. And at one point he got to a part where he said something along the lines of, listen, every single one of you will one day die. And after your death, you will sit or stand before the King of Heaven, and he will determine whether you are fit for heaven or fit for hell. But after that, he says something that's either fascinating or frightening. Maybe both. He said, I tell you the truth, that many people on that day will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? And did we not in your name drive out demons? And did we not in your name perform miracles? Jesus said, I tell you the truth. I will tell them, away from me, you evildoers. I never knew you. See, here are people who called Jesus Lord, were claiming to be Christians. Here are people who had done mental stuff in Jesus' name. And yet he says, depart from me, I never knew you. They called Jesus Lord with their lips. They did amazing things for him in their lives. And yet the King of Heaven says, you are bound for hell. See, Jesus needed his boys to understand that it is possible to look like a Christian, act like a Christian, sound like a Christian, but not be a Christian. It is possible to call Jesus Lord, possible to have a fruitful ministry, but not be a Christian. And what we're going to see in 1 Corinthians 13 this morning is that the Apostle Paul, in this letter to the church in Corinth, says something similar to what Jesus is saying to his disciples on a mountainside. It is possible to look like a church, act like a church, sound like a church, but not be a church. So read with me verse 1 to 3 of 1 Corinthians 13. Paul says, and yet I will show you the most excellent way. If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I'm nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Here's the first point. Here's the first blanks if you've got a sheet. The most excellent way, or the way to nothing. The most excellent way, or the way to nothing. See, Paul has been telling this church that a church is like a body, right? We are one, but we are many. Many different parts, but fundamentally one. And he's been doing that because he's wanted to say that the Spirit has given every single Christian different gifts that are for the good of the whole. But now Paul wants to make something vitally important very clear. When it comes to these spiritual gifts, you can use them in a good way, or you can use them in a bad way. There is a right way to use these gifts and a wrong way. Think of it like a hammer. You can take a hammer and you can use it positively to build something, or negatively to tear something down. A hammer has the potential to do both, construct and destroy, build up or tear down. Spiritual gifts are similar. You can take a spiritual gift and use it in a way that will be excellent for this church, or you can take a spiritual gift and use it in a way that would destroy this church. And so Paul wants to say, I want to show you the most excellent way. Let me put it like this. The way is more important than the what. The way you use your spiritual gifts is more important than what spiritual gift you have. God is not just about observing behavior, but motives. Not just your externals, but your heart. Not just your actions, but your reasons. Not just your gifting, but your character. In fact, me and James last week were talking about the cognitive behavioral therapy stuff, right? That stuff has its benefits. Behavior is important. But God looks beyond behavior to your internal heart motives. And God is looking for love. Fascinating few things he says, right? He takes the spiritual gift of tongues. He says, you can have the gift of tongues. That is, you can speak in languages that humans can understand, or you can speak in languages that angels understand. But if you do not have love, what are you like? You are nothing more than a clanging cymbal. Saul may as well pick up his drum kit, throw it in the air, and let it crash. You're nothing more than that. He says you could have the gift of prophecy, right? You could help people understand amazing things about God. You could fathom all mysteries. Or you could have a gift of faith that can do mental stuff like shift Arthur's seat. But if you don't have love, you yourself are nothing. He says, thirdly, he says, right, you could take every single thing you have, every penny that you own, and you could give it all to the poor. And Paul says that could be for nothing if you do not have love. His point is this: you can do something and it be nothing if you lack love. Something without love is nothing. The presence or absence of love is what determines whether something is excellent or something is nothing. This is the question God's interested in this morning. Do you have love? Because it's possible to look like a Christian, act like a Christian, talk like a Christian, but not be a Christian if you're not loving. And it's possible to look like a church, act like a church, talk like a church, but be nothing because you do not have love. Which leaves you asking what question? Am I loving? Do I have love? That should be the question we're asking this morning. It's what Paul goes on to say. Look at verse 4. We're going to read from verse 4 to 7. 1 Corinthians 13, verse 4 says this: love is patient, and love is kind. It doesn't envy, it doesn't boast, it's not proud, it does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it's not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrong. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Here's the second point, second blank. This is love, but you are not. This is love, but you are not. Now this passage, right, I reckon I've read it at every single wedding I've ever done. But what you need to see here is that in these verses, Paul is not like a wedding singer singing a sentimental love song to make you go, "Aww." He's actually wielding this like a sword to make you say, "Ouch." Because as he describes what love is, he is revealing what they are not. He's saying to this church, this is the excellent way of love, but you are way off. In fact, everything I say that love is, you are the complete opposite. So he says in these verses, love does not envy. In chapter 3, verse 3 of 1 Corinthians, he says there's jealousy among you. He says here, love doesn't boast, but in chapter 3, verse 21, it says, you are boasting about human leaders. It says, love is not proud, but in chapter 4:18, he says, some of you have become arrogant. He says here, love does not dishonor others, but in chapter 4, verse 10, he says, you are honored whilst the apostles are dishonored. He says here, love is not self-seeking. But remember in chapter 11, verse 21, they are so self-seeking that when it comes to the Lord's Supper, some are left hungry with no bread, and some are drunk with all the wine. It says here, love is not easily angered, and love keeps no record of wrongs. But in chapter 6, verse 6, he said, one brother takes another brother to court. It says here, love does not delight in evil. Can you remember what they were doing in chapter 5, verses 1 to 3? They were delighting and they were proud of the fact that someone in their church was sleeping with their stepmom. It says here that this is the church. Is this love? Are these two things compatible with one another? It seems here that it is possible to look like a church, act like a church, talk like a church, but not be a church because they lack love. Now, right, let's think about this. What would have made the church in Corinth look like a church? Well, they were making a massive deal about spiritual gifts, particularly speaking in tongues and the gift of knowledge. They looked super spiritual. Right, if you'd walked into this church, you would have said, look, everyone here is loving being part of this. They love being up the front. They love using their prophecy, speaking in tongues, love giving knowledge to other people. Everyone looks so keen. What a good, healthy church. However, as much as they looked like a church, they were doing Christian-y things for selfish motives. They were doing Christian-y things with non-Christian motives. They were using spiritual gifts in the church without loving the church. And Paul wants to see, listen, this stuff is not measured by what you do. It is measured by why you do it. And a bad motive can make a good action a bad action. Let me put it like this. I would personally love it if the test of how kind of spiritual you were, or the test of how good a Christian you were, was by how you use your spiritual gift. I'd love that, right? Because I think I can preach, right? Most of you come every week, you don't fall asleep. And so I think, in terms of using this thing, yeah, I feel like I am doing the right things. Paul says something important. The test of how spiritual you are, the test of how Christian you are, is not in what you do, but in whether or not you love. The test of how Christian or spiritual you are is not what I do for the 1 hour I am here every week, but what this love stuff looks like for the other 167 hours of a week. Imagine you take your name and you insert it in these verses wherever the word love is. Let me read this, right? I'll use my name, you can use yours. Andy is patient. Andy is kind. Andy does not envy. Andy does not boast. Andy is not proud. Andy does not dishonor others. Andy is not self-seeking. Andy is not easily angered. Andy keeps no record of wrongs. Andy does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. Andy always protects. Andy always trusts. Andy always hopes. Andy always perseveres. Now, to me, that feels awkward. Because it's not me. My name does not fit there. And sure, I may hit some of these things some of the time, but it's not who I am, and it's not always. Everything it says love is not, I am. And everything it says love is, I'm not. And Paul says, what is important is not what you do. What's important is not whether you lead music or serve in the kitchen, or whether you lead a service, or whether you do Sunday Switch, or whether you do the admin, whether you encourage people, whether you open your home for hospitality. The important question is not what, but why. And I could take a good thing like preaching, and I can do it for all the wrong reasons. I can take a good thing and make it a bad thing by a bad motive. I could do this in a way that is self-seeking, in a way to boast, in a way that would make me proud. I could use it like a hammer as a weapon of destruction rather than a tool of construction. Do you see the point? The way is more important than the what. The why is more important than the what. So if you're a member of Gracemount Community Church, we need to be honest with ourselves for a second and step back and say, why do we do what we do? Why'd you do it? Because if it's not out of love, then we might as well not bother, because it's a clanging cymbal, we become nothing, and we gain nothing. Now this is important, so I want to make 3 really quick important points, just to clarify this definition of love. Let me say the first thing. The definition of love here matters, because some of us have had an experience of love that is different from this. Some of us had the experience of people who are really close to us, who with their lips have said, I love you, but then they have not done things that have been patient and kind. In fact, they have been impatient and unkind. Some of us have had people tell us that they love us, but then they've not acted to honor us, they've acted to shame us. They've not delighted in truth, but they've delighted to do evil to us. Some of us have had people that have told us they love us, but they've not protected us, they have harmed us. And so in our heads we have this category that says, maybe love is compatible with these horrible things. You know what I mean? Listen, that is not love. Do not be satisfied with that view of love. Love without kindness is not love. Love that is easily angered is not love. Love that does not protect you is not love. Love that is self-seeking is not love. Real love is not just sentimental words from someone's lips. It is not just selfish feelings that come and go. Love is patient, persevering kindness that behaves for the benefit of others. That is love. Which means not only is our definition of love important, that means that Jesus is important. It means Jesus is important because he is the only one whose name fits in these things. Right? Paul does this not just to show us what we are not. It's not just a mirror to reveal my blemishes, but it is a picture to show us Jesus. See, the church, this church, is made up of unlovely people who have been saved by the love of Jesus. We're a people who Jesus ought to be rightly angered at and ought to keep a record of our wrongs. Jesus ought to be the King of heaven who banishes me to hell. And yet Jesus was kind to us when we didn't deserve it. He was patient with us when we deserved no second chance. And instead of preserving his own comfort and protecting his own interests, he left heaven to come to earth, to die on a cross, to protect me from the wrath of God and hell that I deserve. He was kind to me. He was patient with me. He genuinely loved me. Mark read it at the start of the service. This is love. That God demonstrates his love for us in this, in that whilst I was still his enemy, Christ died for me. Elsewhere, the Apostle John says this is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us. And he sent his son Jesus to be the atoning sacrifice for our sins. However, although Jesus loved us when we were unlovely, he does save us for a purpose. He saves us to make us loving. You should think of Grace Mount Community Church like this. This is a church full of unlovely people learning to be less unlovely every day and learning to love unlovely people more every day. Which is why our church is an important thing. The church will be the testing ground for whether or not we are walking in this most excellent way or whether we've wandered from it. The unlovely people in this room, including me, are the people that God has placed in your life to love. All these things, right? Patience, kindness, not envying others, not being proud, not dishonoring others, not being self-seeking. You can't do them in a room on your own. You don't need to do them in a room full of perfect people. They are things that are necessary in a community that is made up of unlovely people, like me. But the church will be the place where I'm called to love like this, and the church will be the place where I learn to love like this. We need to remember, on that final day when we stand before Jesus, he's not so much going to ask us, did you plant a church? Did you write a hymn? Did you do the internship? Did you serve in the kitchen? Did you give your time? Did you do the admin? Did you do the accounts? He's not going to ask those questions. What's he going to ask? Why did you do it? Did you do it because you loved? He's more likely to ask questions like this. Were you kind to her? And were you patient with him? And did you keep a record of his wrongs? Or were you envious of his gifts? He's asking us, do we have love? I think there's probably a reason, right? The start of this list begins with what in verse 4? Love is patient. It ends at the end of verse 7 by saying love is, what does it do? It perseveres. It's interesting. Love is patient and love perseveres. That means I'm going to try your patience. That means you are going to have to persevere with me. Love sucks, right? That's what love is. But that is true love. And the only reason that you're called to do that to me, and the only reason that I can do that to you, is that I recognize that God loved me first. I'm to be patient with you because God has been unbelievably patient with me. I'm called to be kind to you because God has been unbelievably kind to me. Without this love, we're nothing. Without this love, we have nothing. This is why we need Jesus, but this is what Jesus saves us for. You see that? This is love. We're often not. That's why we need Jesus. Third thing, Paul's not finished. Let's read from verse 8. Love never fails. But where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now we see only a reflection in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. Here's the third point if you're taking notes on the sheet. Gifts will pass away, but love never fails. Gifts will pass away, but love never fails. Now, why is he saying this? Well, remember, he's talking to a church that are fascinated and fixed on spiritual gifts. They're loving spiritual gifts, but they are failing to love one another. That means in this church, loads of people prophesying, but no patience. Loads of people with knowledge, but no kindness. For them, I guess it was they could find significance in the spiritual gifts that they could do. All right? Something like prophecy, something like speaking in tongues, which we're going to get to next week and explain what they are. Something like knowledge, it gives you a bit of a platform. It gets you a following, it gets you a crowd, it gets you a reputation. You can find significance in doing these things. And the truth is, where these things bring significance, you don't get a lot of that from restraining your anger in your home. You don't get a lot of that from being patient with your kids. And so all the emphasis was on what you do. There was no emphasis in what you were. And so Paul wants again to flip the balance onto love. And he does this by asking the question, how long do things last? Terrible illustration, right? But I spend more money on jeans than I do on socks. Because for me it seems that no matter how much money I spend in socks, I wear them twice and they have a hole in them. Whereas jeans seem to last. I reckon I've got jeans that are older than I am. They just seem to go on and on and on, right? And Paul says, you've got to think in terms of what is going to last in terms of significance. Now that's a terrible illustration, but see why Paul uses it. He says, let's take the things that you are looking to find significance. Speaking in tongues, prophesying, and knowledge. He says, there'll be a time where these things pass away. There'll be a time where these things are stilled, where these things cease. Now why is that? Because all these gifts are things that reveal who God is. We need them because at the moment our knowledge of God is only partial. But when we get to heaven, he describes it as when completeness comes, I will know God completely. So at that point, do you need a gift like prophecy, tongues, or knowledge that will help you know God more? They're not necessary. Somebody prophesying in heaven is like somebody turning on a torch at midday outside in July on the equator. It's not necessary. No more light needed. Which means in heaven, I'll be like Meryl. Not black, by the way. But unemployed. No need for surgeons in heaven. No sickness, no suffering, no death. No need for preachers in heaven. Because we will have a complete knowledge of God. You will not need me to teach you about who God is. Because your knowledge will be complete. And so he says to them, you are trying to find significance in gifts that do not last. But love never fails. Love lasts. And so Paul says, if you want to do something, if you want to invest your life in something that will last forever, then be patient with your misses and be kind to your kids. Interesting, isn't it? These things endure into eternity. These things last. Now, this is hugely important because we get so stuck in this world, but a Christian and a church is not a this world thing. There's eternity within us. Your life here has a sequel there that will never end. Your life continues there. You are not made just for this world. He says it like this, right? He says, this world is like childhood. But in the next world is where you will be an adult. He says, this world is like a pale reflection in a mirror. The next world is like seeing Jesus face to face. And so don't try and find significance in the things of childhood that will pass away. Don't try and find significance in a thing that's just like a mirror, but find significance in what is mature and what is face to face. We're so tempted to find significance in the things of this world and the things that we do. Give me a job. Give me a title. Give me letters after my name. Give me a story that people will tell. Paul says, nah, give me love. Do you have love? In God's value system, that is what is significant. The way is more important than the what, and the eternal is more important than the temporary. And so he finalizes by saying, verse 13, these three remain: faith, hope, and love. He says, now, today, these three things remain: faith, hope, and love. Now come back to where we started, right? We said Jesus sat on a mountainside, his boys, the disciples, sitting round him, hanging on every word, because in this moment, the King of Heaven is sat on a mountainside teaching them about the kingdom of heaven. And he got to that point where he said, one day you will die, and after your death you will stand before the King of Heaven, and he will say whether or not you're fit for heaven or fit for hell. And he said that thing that was both kind of fascinating and frightening, where he said, I tell you the truth, that on that day, many people will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? And did we not in your name cast out many demons? And did we not in your name perform many miracles? And Jesus said, I tell you the truth. I do not know you. Away from me, you evildoers. See, on that day, Jesus was not interested in how much he'd prophesied. He was not interested in how many demons they had driven out. He was not interested in how many miracles they have done. You know what he's interested in? Faith, hope, and love. Faith. A deep trust, belief in, leaning on Jesus. That he died on the cross to forgive our sins, that we might not face hell, but we might be made fit for heaven. Faith. Hope. Living with the assurance that one day that faith will be replaced by sight, that hope will be replaced by reality as we live in the place where death has died and love lasts. and love. A patient, persevering kindness that behaves for the benefit of others. A week past Friday, me and Ian went to a festival show that ended up in a memorial garden that had plaques all around the wall. And the thing about those plaques is it basically sums up your life in a sentence. That should humble us. Imagine your plaque had 3 words on it. What 3 words would you choose? What 3 words would your kids choose? Because our life will come down to that. And Jesus says, these 3 things remain. These 3 things matter. Faith, hope, and love. In some ways today, it doesn't matter whether we call ourselves a Christian or if we are non-Christian. If we don't know, if we are not defined by these 3 things, faith, hope, and love, everything we do, everything we are, will make us and make us gain nothing but hell. This morning we need the love of Jesus to transform only lovely people like us into a people who genuinely have this kind of love, don't we?